So our next god is Tyr. Tyr is another god a lot of people hear about. The deity of a war and heroic glory, Tyr, was regarded as the bravest of the Norse gods of the Germanic people, and in spite of his association with wars, more specifically the formalities of conflict, including treaties, his origins are rather enigmatic, with the deity possibly being one of the oldest and most important of the ancient Germanic pantheon, until he was supplanted by Odin, who has been described as in many myths as Tyr's father, while other stories place Tyr as a son of the giant Ymir. In any case, since some of the aspects of Tyr relate to formalities, the god was also hailed to as a deity of justice and oaths. Tyr was often depicted as one-handed god, since his limb was bitten off by the monstrous wolf Fenrir when the god tried to trap the creature. In spite of this episode, Tyr foretold to be slain by Grum, the guard dog of hell, as opposed to Fenrir. And like other Norse gods, Tyr also has its significance in our modern-day context. It is in regard that the Old English variant his name Tyr was used and associated with Mars by the Romans, and thus Dies Martini, Mars Day, came to be known as Twigs Day, Tuesday. They do put that in there of him being killed by Grarg, and not Fenrir, because when you actually learn about Tyr, as he was growing up with Fenrir, he was actually Fenrir was his companion. Tyr made a bond with him, and when he was young and growing up, he played with him, and he would go out on hunts with him. That was why it came to Tyr putting his hand in Fenrir's mouth. He knew he was going to lose it, but he was doing the honorable thing because Fenrir was actually his friend, where he's like, I know you're getting fucked in this situation, but I'll be the one to do it, because I'm your friend. I'll make that sacrifice. He knew the other gods weren't, and that's a whole another thing of Loki's children, because Fenrir was one of Loki's children, and that was pretty much what happened. Was Fenrir grew bigger, stronger than the gods could control, and they felt that Fenrir would be in trouble someday, so they're like, oh, let's just lock him up somewhere. And that's where it came to him having to be chained down, and Tyr having to put his hand in the mouth and lose his hand over it. Does anyone have any questions on Tyr? Okay. Next, we'll go on to Bragi. Bragi, which roughly translates to poet, often considered as a skaldic god of poetry in Norse mythology, pertains to a unique mythical character who possibly shared traits with the historical 9th century bard Bragi Brodson, who himself might have served in the courts of Ragnar Lothbrok and the Bjorn at the Hage. In any case, it came to the legends that the god Bragi was perceived as the bard of Valhalla, the magnificent hall of Odin, where all of the fallen warriors and heroes are gathered for the ultimate showdown at Ragnarok. To that end, Bragi was hailed as a skillful poet's god who sang and brought to Odin majestic hall by the... missed that one. To the end, Bragi was hailed as a skillful poet god who sang and delighted the hordes of the Einjar, warriors who died in battle and were brought to Odin's majestic hall by the Valkyries. Snorri Sturluson wrote about Bragi. One is called Bragi. He is renowned for his wisdom, and most for all fluency of speech and skill with words. He knows most skaldship. After him, skaldship is called Briar, and from his name that one is called Briar man or woman, who possesses elegance of surpassing others of women or men. His wife is Idun, goddess associated with the apples of youth, and that's Idun. As for the Norse gods' historical counterparts, there are a few candidates other than Bragi Brodson mentioned in various poetic edited pieces. The names include Bragi, son of Halfdan, and the old, and Bragi Hognesson. He was mentioned in the second part of the I didn't say that one. I'm going to try. But he's the god of poets. They said there are some contexts of a possible guy in Ragnar Lothbrok that he may have been modeled off of. As far as in the Germanic, I don't think Bragi really existed during the Germanic times. He was more brought up into the Scandinavian times in Scandinavia and Iceland. Does anyone have further questions on Bragi?
Why was he brought up later on?
I believe in Germanic texts there's nothing that really relates to Bragi in the Germanic tribes in the early times, but he was then kind of started showing up in sagas in the Scandinavian time, and that's why they refer to the single poet that was in Ragnar Lothbrok's group during the 7th century, I think is when he was starting to be written about, and that's where some people believe that his saga may have made him into a god status because of the words and how he did things and how people perceived him. But there's no actual written documentation saying on this day this guy became a god. So our next one we'll go to is the famous Loki. Start off by saying a lot of people don't like Loki. They think he's a mischievous dick. They're not wrong. But you do have to remember, in any culture, anywhere, you can't always have evil on one or good on one side. You do have to have some evil to counter it out. So some people will tell you Loki's play with the gods, Loki's involved in all this, is he's the counterweight to it. Others say he's the one you learn from what not to do. You can perceive that how you want to take it. Some think he's just a straight up dick. Represented as having qualities somewhat akin to the chaotic and mischievous aspects of ancient Egyptian god Set, Loki is regarded as a trickster amongst the Norse gods, who as a Jotun also possesses the power to shapeshift. Essentially, he is projected as an entity who is not entirely evil in his whimsical purposes, and yet precariously scheming in his cruel actions, many of which led to misfortunes and even tragedies, such as Baldur's death. Now, given his heritage as an outsider among the Azir tribe of gods, the narrative of Loki as in ancient stories might have served as a plot device that provides a soft anesthetics to other gods and his deeds. His complex relationship with other gods, particularly Thor, comes to the light of different sources. So with that, in the Losvin's Lokinsana, or Loki's quarrel, Loki keeps on insulting Thor and then goes into hiding, fearing the hammer of Mjolnir. On the other hand, on the Parmsvotia, the angelic Thariskavodia, Thor and Loki share their camaraderie when they together hatch a plan to retrieve the stolen Mjolnir from Jotunheim, from a Jotun named Premier. And pretty much what they're saying there is you're going to find reading in the sagas, there's days Thor is hunting down Loki wanting to kill him and nothing more than just crush his skull in. And then there's other days they're actually buddy-buddy out in the world doing adventures together, seeing what great things they can do or what they can find. And that's where they talk about, you know, he's good, he's bad, and they talk about he did mean things, he schemed on people, his intention wasn't necessarily to kill people, but sometimes that was a byproduct. But there are some sagas where they are actually comrades and going out and doing things and being good brothers, and then other times Thor is just hunting him down wanting to kill him. However, in spite of Loki's complicated character narrative, he is foretold to be responsible for the deaths of many Norse gods during Ragnarok. For example, Loki's son Fenrir the wolf will kill Odin, while his other offspring Jormungandr the serpent will poison Thor, that will ultimately lead to the thunder god's demise. Is there any questions on Loki? He's pretty usually cut and dry. Our next one is Hel. And they didn't mention this in the paragraph before, I didn't put it in there because she's the next under, but Hel too is actually one of Loki's children. And when he had these children, he was actually cheating on his wife with a Jotun, with a giantess. And when Odin found out about it, he wanted them brought before him. And his thought was, well, how do we hide these under the table for him cheating on his wife? She'll be fucking pissed, whatever. But then he looked at them, and Odin himself didn't have the heart to actually kill the children. Because when he looked at the serpent, he was like, this might come back to beat me, but let's release it in the sea and let him maybe he'll leave us alone. And that's how the Midgard serpent ended up going to the sea. But the Midgard serpent ended up growing and growing and growing, and to the point that it engulfed the entire world and came back and was touching its own tail. And then you have Fenrir the wolf, that was simply no bigger than a German shepherd as a puppy, but same thing. He's like, we can't kill it. And even Tyr was like, I'll watch over Fenrir. And again, as they grew up, the wolf got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and they got to a point Fenrir was so powerful, so monstrous. That's when Odin came back and was like, we need to bind him, we need to lock him up somewhere because he might be our demise someday. And thus then the story of Tyr. And then it came to Hel. She is talked about, written of, half dead corpse, half beautiful woman. But there are some contexts where when Odin talked to her, she was a very polite little girl. She wasn't rude, she wasn't mean, and because of that, Odin was like, I can't bind you, I can't lock you away, I don't want to kill you, but you are still technically part of our family, and you are a goddess. So he ended up giving her the realm of Helheim, and that's how she ended up in Helheim looking over it, where technically he locked her and kept her away, but still allowed her to be herself. We tend to associate hell with a realm of internal damnation. Well, its Germanic counterparts was no walk in the park either, with its inhabitants like Fenrir the wolf and Jormungandr the serpent, and other subjects who had died throughout sickness and old age. The ruler of the netherworld was the infamous Hel, who was the daughter of Loki and the giant Angrboda, and it fell upon her to judge and decide the fate of the souls who entered the realm. And that's where you had talked about earlier, where Luke had said that you'd probably go to Helheim. Helheim was simply if you didn't die gloriously in battle and you weren't chosen to go to Freya's hall, you weren't chosen to go to Valhalla, you didn't go to one of the other halls, if you died of sickness or you died of old age, you went to Helheim. It wasn't necessarily the worst thing in the world, but you obviously don't get to battle and do all the fun stuff in the other realms, but that's where you got to go. But once you were there, you were hers, which goes back to Balder, was the gods couldn't simply go down and just take him. They had to ask Hel, and Hel had to release, and that she gave what she wanted, and they couldn't give it. So she was like, nope, he stays here. Descriptions of Hel, the being, have found in numerous Viking sagas and poems, and most of them portray her as being partly decomposed with a face and body of a living woman, but with the thighs and legs of a corpse. Still among the Norse goddesses, she was said to be the most powerful, even more than Odin himself, inside her own realm of Helheim. The tragic episode of Balder's death confirms such as an association to power, since it ultimately falls upon Hel to decide the fate of the soul of a god who was considered the wisest and most pure of all the gods of Azir. And pretty much what they're saying is, even Odin in all his power couldn't command her to release Balder. That she still had enough power to be like, I decide, you don't get that decision. And that's what they're referring to. There is a lot of here, you'll see even on the picture. A lot of people depict her as half her face is half dead, half alive. I don't really know the origins of that, but when you do read the sagas, they actually talk about the upper half being womanly and normal, and the bottom half of being a corpse. I guess you can take it either way, I guess, and to human eyes, the half and half was more understanding. I don't know. Is there any questions on Hel?
A question on Balder, kind of. If he was like, the finest of the gods and all this stuff, how come he got sent to hell and not Valhalla or Freya's Hall or something different?
Because it was the way he died.
Okay.
Because he wasn't in battle.
Okay.
He wasn't gloriously drinking and died because he drank everybody under the table. He wasn't on a battlefield. He wasn't helping someone. It was simply his brother picked up mistletoe and an arrow that he was told to and shot him.
Okay.
And that's kind of in the Norse society is Odin, and I'm not quite sure from what I do understand from the sagas, is I believe Hel is the only one to decide all the gods' fates in the first place, where they go and what happens to them. The gods don't be like, oh, other than like Odin owning his own hall and stuff. But I'll have to get more into that. But that's essentially, from what I understand, that's pretty much what happened, was because it wasn't something glorious. That's why he ended up in Helheim. And Hel, she essentially gets to decide the fates of the gods. And that's where they talk about, in her realm, she's more powerful than all the other gods. And that's probably where the Marvel Universe, this giant monstrous that came out of the ground, zapping cities, destroying stuff, kind of took it overboard on that, but that's probably what they stemmed it from. So, so next then we'll talk about Heimdall. He's another one that a lot of people you hear about and talk about.
That's confusing though, because at Ragnarok, any god that dies is dead. They're not. Why is that different?
any different than, I guess I'm confused.
So Balder is a god.
Yep.
He dies, goes to hell.
Doesn't come back.
Yes. Any other god,
If they die,
they
will
die.
not come back.
They're done.
And at the end of Ragnarok, that's what Ragnarok is, of all the gods are dying. And that's where the debate of Ragnarok being Christianity winning over the world or what it is, because essentially when you read the story of Ragnarok, in the end, all the gods die for some reason. They're just dead. They're not coming back. And it was Baldur and I think sons that rise from the dead and come back and save the world and make it prettier, and the god of light will do this. And that's where Luke was talking about it. That may be more of a reference of them building him to be Christian and Christ and God that way, than actually just the world dying. And that's where there's debate of, has Ragnarok happened? Hasn't it happened? Was it that? Was it other things? Is it still in our future? You know, that's for you to dig and debate that on your own. But yes, once the gods die, that's the one thing in the Norse is if our gods die, they die. They're dead. They don't come back. I mean, are there ways to bring them back? There are, but it's not something we're probably going to do. And that actually goes into the one god that's not, I don't have here today, is like Iduna. The reason the gods stay young is they eat Iduna's apples, and that's what keeps them forever young and why they don't age. And that is why Odin looks older than the other gods, because he is one of the gods that does not actually eat the apples.
I didn't know
So next would be Heimdall. Other questions? I go too fast here. So next we'll be discussing about Heimdall. Often portrayed as ever-vigilant guardian of Asgard, the stronghold of Aesir, Norse gods, Heimdall was hailed as the descendant of the god Fenrir and the grandson to the sea Jotun, and the grandson of a sea Jotun. Aesir, grandson of the sea Jotun of Aesir. It's pretty much just saying another giant. He is used when, all right, here, give me a second. He is often depicted with his horn of the Gilhorn, which he is put to use when intruders approach the home of the Aesir, the tribe of the gods. Pertaining to the guarding duty, Heimdall is attested to possess keen eyesight and hearing, complemented by other qualities like having foreknowledge and vast sources of energy. He is foreseen to be able to see far away, hear far away. He's kind of like the watchdog. He's the bruiser at the door before you get to Asgard. He's the guy that's going to see you coming and deal with you before you get there. He's also the guarder of the Bifrost Bridge. And they talk about the Horn of Gindale. That's when you go to the Ragnarok. When the sound of Gundyr, or you hear it in the sky and it rattles the world, then you know that Ragnarok has begun. Interestingly enough, there is a possibility that Heimdall was once considered to be the father of mankind, a vaguely mentioned in the Old Norse poem, the Volspa. Other scholars have hypothesized that Heimdall as a figurehead was historically perceived by the Norse tribes as being responsible for creating the hierarchy and classes among men. In any case, reverting to the mythology, Heimdall also plays an important role in the impending Ragnarok, where he will sound the dire horn call of Gundahorn in a signal of the arrival of the giants and monsters, and in the consequent confrontations, Loki and Heimdall are foretold to slay one another. With the Heimdall, they talk about him being the father of mankind. There are sagas and stories, I think in the Icelandic sagas, or the Scandinavians, where they talk about him coming out of the sea and him having those 7 or 9 mothers that
9.
And it talks about him coming out, and he was actually the one that birthed the first man, and the mankind came from him. That's another story of where mankind came from. In the creation story, it was Odin who took mud and wood and put us together and created mankind. So there's a scholarly debate, on that, on who is right, who isn't. I'd probably go more in the creation because that was the early Germanic tribes, that was their story. Heimdall being the father of mankind was into the later years. And this is where, when you get out of Germania and you start migrating up north, this is where the gods and goddesses do change levels because of geography, time, people. So our next one is Freya. I like to depict her as the wild party child. She likes to go out and have fun. When you get into the Northerns, I guess that's the easiest way for me to describe her. This is the one that we talked about earlier, being as possibly the same that Frigga evolved from or turned into, that Freya had turned into Frigg. So Freya, in Old Norse meaning lady, though initially belonging to the Vanir tribe of the Old Norse gods, was also as loyal and an honorary member of the Aesir. After the conclusion of the tribal war, emphasizing the aspects of love, beauty, and even opulent objects, the goddess was often represented as the seeker of pleasure and unknown. Focusing on the latter, Freya embodied the Volva, the female seer of the Norse religion who had the ability to tinker with the seer, magic pertaining to destiny and its weaving. In essence, Freya had the ability to alter and manipulate one's desire and fortunes, and thus was often associated with the undiscernible attitudes of cats. Freya was also regarded amongst the Norse goddesses as the ruler of afterlife realm, the Volsving, which allowed her to choose half the warriors who were slain in battle. All of these characteristics and potent Volva mirrors of the historical scenario of the Germanic pantheon, especially during the Volks and Wandering and I've remembered that one, or the migration period between the circa 400 to 800 AD. In that regard, the tribal societies tended to favor two gods at the head of their pantheon, symbolizing the chieftain warrior. Wait a minute, did I skip something? I skipped Freya, didn't I?
Mm-hmm.
All right, we'll get back to him. Symbolizing the chieftain warrior who would lead them to battles and plunders, and his wife, the prophetess, who would outline the future outcome of such military encounters by her magic. Many historians and scholars believe that these two figures eventually correlated into what we know as the Norse entities of Odin and Frigg, with the latter being the same deity who was regarded to as Freya. To that end, Freya's husband is often identified as Ur, roughly meaning furor of fear and our ecstasy. And Odin, the Old Norse for Odin, is just a word for the Odur with the masculine definite of article. And that's where they talk about that. You can get into it in one of them, but when you get into early Germanic tribes, I forget the names, there were actual twins during that time, and they were named something different, and it was the evolution of the pantheon is what they're talking about, where they're talking about that some people believe that Freya and her husband evolved into later days of what we say of Odin and Frigga. They both survive. There's some text, I believe, but I've never really dug into it, so I don't know that too much about it. I just know of it. Is there any questions on Freya? Freya is also the daughter of Njord and sister to Freyr. So the god I skipped will be Freyr. Freyr is her brother. One of the most venerated and beloved of the Norse gods, Freyr, was unique in his origin since he belonged to the Vanir tribe of the Norse gods, as opposed to the Aesir. Usually depicted as a brawny man with his flowing hair, Freyr, the son of a sea god Njord, was hailed as the foremost of deities when it came to the aspect of fertility, covering both sexual and ecological scopes. But simply put, the god embodied bountiful harvests, wealth, peace, and possibly even fertility, all symbolized by Freyr's boar. Given his association to such important avenues, Freyr was a favored entity in reverence of worship when it came to marriage rites and harvest celebrations. The preferred sacrifice in these cases often involved the boar, the animal symbolically linked to the fertility god. In that regard, in the Norse mythology, Freyr was also known to have traveled with a chariot pulled by boars, and was also enacted by ancient historical processions of Germanic priests who went around in chariots, typically pulled by boars, coming for a peace and prosperity for various regions of Germania. Interestingly enough, Freyr was also associated with the elves, since his residence pertained to Elfenheim, the homeland of the elves. In that regard, some scholars have hypothesized that Freyr was possibly even regarded as the king of elves with immense riches, though such conjecture is not well established in the Norse lore and actual historical sources. Moreover, Freyr also boasted his ship, I can't pronounce that one. What he said. Which had an inviolable capacity to always have favorable winds, and always also still casting its modular design that allowed the craft to be folded into a tiny packet. That was another one of those devices built by the dwarves. This boat could literally be folded up, put into his pocket. When he wanted, pulled it out, extended it out, made a ship, put everything on it, and didn't matter where he was, didn't matter where he was going, the winds were always in his favor. Otherwise, if you're a sailor, known as having the wind in his pocket. So with that, those are the 12 major gods that you hear a lot about, and that will come up. Does anyone have any questions on these? Any more information, symbols, anything you'd like to learn more about them?
You talk about all the gods being dead. Are they?
That's a modern scholarly debate.
I mean, why do we go through all this trouble to have
That
that?
would depend on whether or not you believe Ragnarok happened already. If you believe Ragnarok happened already, then yes, the gods would be dead. And you would be praying essentially to old dead gods. If you do not believe Ragnarok has happened, then the gods are very much alive.
Do they
Still-
say when this was supposed to take place?
No, I mean, not necessarily. There's the stories of Heimdall blowing his horn and the downfall of the gods, and that's
Simple Luspa, though, which is the sayings of the seeress, so it's supposed to be a future telling, if you
Yes.
say it that way.
it's something that's still debated on, that people have the debate. Like I said, was Christianity the Ragnarok? Was Ragnarok happen? Was it meant of something different? Was it world catastrophes? Again, it goes back to what you believe. I personally believe Ragnarok hasn't happened, but that is my personal assumption of that. Pepper? Everything makes sense? No questions on anything? What was Thor's chariot called by?
Horse?
Right?
Nick? You done?
All right, well, I guess with that, that'll,
One thing. There's the part where, I guess Loki and Heimdall are laying next to each other at the very end of Heimdall is explaining to Loki what he sees in the future. So I can't remember if I read that in the Poetic Gita or if I heard that from Bill Gates. I can't
it's not
recall.
one I don't think I read. Can you think of a reference to that?
I can't, it sounds more like gaming to me, though,
Yeah,
but I couldn't tell you for sure.
Because I can't recall reading that in the Poetic. And I think that there comes from Bill Gaiman, but
it could have. I don't remember it being in the saga. It's not saying it's wrong, but I don't remember being
okay,
anything on there.
well, that kind of pisses me off.
Did you read it, or was it an audiobook?
Audiobook,
Was it Crawford's voice or not Crawford's voice?
Crawford.
Okay,
No,
then it's,
the Poetic Gita,
well, do you remember who was reading it to you, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Crawford.
Then it's not Gaiman, then it's gotta be in. an
But I
actual-
also did Bill Gaiman too. Audiobook.
Well, right, that's what I'm asking, do you remember who said it?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to figure out.
Oh, okay, you don't know. Okay, that doesn't, can't help you then.
Because I can't recall putting that story in both books. I think it came from Neil Gaiman, but
I don't recall if it has any dialogue between Heimdallr and Loki at this. I think it's basically just like Voluspa that talks about them fighting each other. And there's no real interpersonal dialogue in Voluspa. It's just what basically happens. Which is what makes me feel like it's probably Gaiman that wrote that in. So it's the more personalized drama.
so he just
Yeah, you gotta remember, Gaiman's the guy that also made that horrible rendition of Beowulf that was like CGI and had Jennifer Lopez as this weird pregnant mother that had sex with the king. It's like, don't.
We were just discussing that before this.
And that's where you hear like Luke say a lot and Solo say a lot and I say a lot. Sometimes you have to read and go into these things very open-minded because there are a lot of things where people have written their own parts in. So what essentially you may have thought was true for many years, you may find out that nope, that was just somebody writing it in.
so he's just making up his own stuff.
He doesn't totally make it up. He's dramatizing it, so he's throwing his own flair on it to make it more engaging.
What happens is a lot of people that read them, they're just like, well, there's nothing here to describe this, and that just sounds boring. So they throw in a sentence
Yeah,
or two
so they
to try
add-
to make it sound more interesting
So I'm
and
just
to
stay
perk
away
it
from that,
up.
I guess. Yeah.
Well, what dialogue were they saying? Between Loki and Heimdall, what were they talking about?
Heimdall was basically telling Loki what he sees in the future because Loki was laughing and he's like, well, I've won.
Oh,
You know, it's
yeah, I
over.
don't think that's anywhere in
And Heimdall was
The
basically
actual
telling him
material.
what he sees in the future. He sees the rebirth of the Balder and, you know.
yeah.
the rebirth
In
of-
the Eddic material, it's never worded that way. It's the it's the Cirrus, the Volva that says that, not Heimdall.
Mm-hmm. That's when Odin goes to meet the seer, and that's when he learns of the fate of how Ragnarok plays out.
Mm.